Hey folks, this is Kelani. Allied races have been a hot topic for a while now, especially considering we just got our hands on the first round of races that are being introduced under this new banner of allied races, as opposed to just playable races. There's probably a few reasons why they're specifically called allied races, we'll get to that in a little bit, but either way, the topic of future allied races has also been quite an active one. There's a few new races in Battle for Azeroth that people are hoping and wishing will be rolled into the allied races going forward, perhaps towards the end of the Battle for Azeroth expansion, or maybe even partway through. The main race that people have been talking about is the Vulpera, and there seems to be plenty of people on either side of the debate, so let's have a look at what a race needs to be added into the allied races, what info we have on the Vulpera joining our ranks, and what other races could be coming our way in the future. Why are allied races not just simply new playable races? What makes them different or special? From the 6 examples we have so far, the Lightforged Draenei, Void Elves, Dark Iron Dwarves, High Mountain Tauren, Nightborn and Zandalari Trolls, they're sort of too similar to other races that we already have access to really call them new playable races. The Lightforged Draenei are just Super Saiyan Draenei, Void Elves are exiled Blood Elves tampering with the Void, Dark Iron Dwarves are just another clan of dwarves, the same goes for the High Mountain Tauren, the Nightborn are another race of elves, probably the only one in this list which could stand up as its own playable race, and the Zandalari Trolls are another tribe of trolls. They're not all super new to us either. We've seen all of these races running around in the world previously. Most of them were new in Legion, but by the time we were able to actually play them, we had already become well acquainted with our new allies. So maybe an allied race is a race we interact with before we are able to play them. You know, an ally that becomes a playable race. We didn't really interact with Blood Elves or Draenei before they were added. Goblins and Worgen are a kind of halfway dealio, and we hadn't seen much of the Pandaren either before they were added to the game. So there's probably a gameplay element involved, but I think there's also development time to take into consideration. All of these allied races were well established when it comes to models and animations. Most of them are just a copy-paste, because they're already tied to an existing race. The Nightborn are the only race which might have been built up from the ground, but instead they share the same animations and rig as the Night Elves. I think the only model which is new is the Zandalari male, and that's probably mostly due to the posture change. So allied races might be easy races, ones which can be added without the huge undertaking that comes with new models, animations, and maybe most important of all, making sure gear fits properly. Having the models done and ready to go means you don't really have to do much work when it comes to armor and weapons. They can just copy-paste those visuals as well. So when we're looking for races which could be potential allied races in the future, we should be looking at how they're involved in the current story, how much extra work it would take to make them an actual playable race, models, animations, and so forth, and lastly, whether or not it would actually make sense. I'm sure a few people would love to play some obscure races, which ultimately don't really fit in as a playable race. I wonder if we'll even have any new races added into the game outside of the allied race system going forward. It seems to make much more sense working with a race, helping them recover from whatever horrors they've gotten themselves into, and thus earning their trust, as opposed to an expansion going live and there's suddenly this new race we haven't heard much about, but we can go ahead and play them anyways. Just a curious thought. So let's talk about the Vulpera, because people seem to love the idea of being able to play these foxy little fellas. I would say the Vulpera makes sense in terms of story and what's going on in Battle for Azeroth. We work with them and help them out of their little pickle, so we're sure to become friends, and that could ultimately lead to them becoming an allied race. I do wonder which faction they would end up on though. It seems like the Horde helps them out first, but the Alliance is probably going to be friendly with them as well. Not that that stopped any of our current allied races from choosing sides. So I would say they would probably end up on the Horde side, or be a neutral race like the Pandaren. They also make quite a bit of sense when you take into account their current models and animations. They're all using the Goblin kit. That means the amount of work it would take could line up with the requirements of an allied race, though I believe the way NPCs and playable characters are textured works slightly differently, hence the Nightborn playable race being a little watered down compared to the NPCs, which means if Vulpera did become an allied race, we might see a similar outcome, with them being a little different from from the NPCs we're used to seeing. There was also a curious find during the data mining of the Battle for Azeroth Alpha. There's an entire list of races available in the game with a flag for whether or not that race is playable. Vulpera were recently marked as a playable race, which sparked a whole bunch of theories and forum posts, but we got a little comment from the devs which basically said that flag doesn't actually mean they're playable. Marking a race as playable has certain benefits for NPCs, so while that doesn't mean Vulpera won't be playable eventually, they're just saying don't go jumping to conclusions based off of data mined info, which we should all be well aware of already. So I would say Vulpera are a strong candidate for an allied race, and if I were a betting man, I would put my money on them eventually being added into the ranks of allied races. But what about some of the other new races we'll be interacting with in Battle for Azeroth? We've got some snake people to go along with our fox people, but I imagine the Sethrak wouldn't end up as allied races for a few reasons. First, they're the race we're helping the Vulpera against. They seem like the bad guys in a few zones, and we don't usually go about recruiting the bad guys. It wouldn't make much sense in terms of the story. The other major problem would be their models. This would be a race which would require a lot of additional development time to bring them to a place where animations and gear would be ready for a playable race. They're just too different, so while they look pretty awesome and cool, I don't think they're allied race material. Tortollan, on the other hand, are a race we're going to be friendly with. We have a reputation to grind with them, so we're going to be working with them one way or another. Friendly races are always good candidates for allied races, right? Sadly, their models are also quite a bit different. They might look like a Pandaren with a turtle shell, but that shell would get in the way of a lot of different types of gear. I would say they're way more likely than the Sethrak to make it to a playable race, but I wouldn't get your hopes up too high for being able to play a turtle, riding around on a turtle with a whole bunch of turtle pets. Blood Trolls are also new faces on the block, and while we're getting a different troll tribe as an allied race, they're a tribe we're actively trying to help and work towards an alliance with. The Blood Trolls are assaulting the Zandalari and overall seem to be quite happy being the bad guys. Once again, a really cool race with fantastic visuals, but I don't think we're going to be buddy-buddy with them anytime soon. The Kulturas humans are an interesting race to consider for allied races because the Alliance are going to be very friendly with them. They're basically already allies to begin with, and they add some different types of humans, a race we've been playing since vanilla. I think this might end up being another type of allied race where the team takes an existing race and provides us with additional customization options. We don't have a muscle or weight slider when creating a human character like in a lot of recent MMOs, but what if we had the thin models and the big humans available instead? That would give us a few options to bring us up to date with the character creation at the very least. Adding them in as allied races might just provide the right vehicle to get those body shapes into our hands as playable models. I would love for the Kulturan humans to become allied races for this very reason. The only problem could be the models. With them being so different, that might be a bit too much work for them to become playable, but we can keep our fingers crossed and hope. So that's the new races coming with Battle for Azeroth, but allied races don't have to be limited to new races being added. The Dark Iron Dwarves are a great example. So what other older races could become playable through the allied races system? The main thing that concerns me here is the story elements. How do you bring some of these races back into the story without using some really bad excuses? I'll be interested to see what happens with the Dark Iron Dwarves in BFA, because that's one of the big questions that still remain unanswered. But nevertheless, let's have a look at what races could be included. We've seen other tribes or clans added as allied races for dwarves and trolls, but plenty of other races have more tribes or clans as well. The Orcs are a great example. They might have the most clans out of any other race, and we know for sure that we'll be getting the Draenor Orcs as an allied race sooner or later. That's one little tidbit of information that came from Ian during a Q&A session. Draenor Orcs probably refers to Mag'har or brown-skinned Orcs in general, which I imagine would be one of the easiest allied races to include and could really just be a skin colour option, but never mind. Other clans like the Dragonmaw, Blackrock or Shadowmoon Orcs could be included quite easily as well, each with their own distinct visuals. When it comes to Orc clans, it really is a question of which ones work best, because there's plenty to work with there. More Dwarf clans could be included as well. We're getting the Dark Iron Dwarves, but what about the Wildhammer clan? I might actually play a dwarf if I could have some of those awesome tattoos. Again, it comes down to which ones make sense, rather than if there's potential in these races. I would be surprised if the Wildhammer clan didn't somehow make it into the allied races. They seem like a very popular pick. The same could be said for almost any type of sub-race for the basic races we already have access to. There's so many troll tribes that could be added in if they really wanted to just bulk up the amount of available races for us to play. We could have Broken Draenei, Mechanomes, Lepernomes, Forsaken Elves. The list really does go on. The problems that I see with many of these sub-races is that they could be added in with just a few customization options, and they would be hard to fit into the story properly. High Mountain Tauren only have a few customization differences when compared to the Tauren, but they made sense as an allied race because of their story. I wonder if Blizzard would add in quite a few of these sub-race options as customization instead of allied races, but it's honestly just a guessing game at this point. As for older races that we've befriended in the past, there are three that really stick out more than any other. They're Jinyu, Hosen, and Ethereals. Stay with me on this one because I realise any race with 2 legs, and maybe a few with more, could be considered for an allied race, but the Jinyu and the Hosen are almost exactly like what seems will happen in Battle for Azeroth. The Horde helped the Hosen, the Horde will be helping the Zandalari. The Alliance helped the Jinyu, the Alliance will be helping the Kultirans, or the Dark Iron Dwarves, depending on how that turns out. These two races are already faction-specific, we've befriended them plenty, and except for them being a few expansions old, they kind of make sense to be included as allied races. The Jinyu are also rigged up using the Night Elf male skeleton, from what I remember, which means they might take a little less work to get ready for players. The Hosen, on the other hand, are a big question mark when it comes to letting players actually play as an ooking dookering monkey, which is really the only pitfall in including these two races at all. The Ethereals are an interesting one because they've been around for quite a while at this point, but they're also being somewhat reintroduced in the story. We had the Locust Walker on Argus, and an Ethereal popped his head in to check out the Sunwell in some of the allied race introduction quests. If they're still relevant when the battle for Azeroth turns towards the Void, we could see quite a lot more from the Ethereals. The problem is that even though they were neutral in the Burning Crusade, they seem to be leaning more towards the bad guy job listings, creating trouble with the Void, turning innocent creatures into nasty tentacle monsters, that kind of thing. The only chap who doesn't seem to want to kill us is Locust Walker, so maybe they're a little too evil for us to recruit, but Ethereals also seem to be quite a popular pick for races players want to be able to play, even though sorting an Ethereal for things like customization or gear seems like a huge pain in the rear and a lot of development work. So I would say maybe don't expect to see many allied races in the future, and the ones that are most likely to come next might be some old friends like the Drana Orcs, maybe another Dwarf clan or something similar. Vulpera will probably be playable someday, but I wouldn't get your hopes up for anything before the end of Battle for Azeroth. How do you think Blizzard will handle the potential of this new system? Do you think we'll end up with a crazy amount of playable races, or do you think they'll keep things small and meaningful? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. Remember to leave a like just below the video before you leave, and if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. But apart from that, thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.